Blue Cross and Blue Shield companies formed out of a need to provide affordable health care to teachers, loggers, and miners. We are now celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Blues, developing the National Labor Office to strengthen its commitment to organized labor. Blue Cross Blue Shield's National Labor Office remains focused on America's workers, advocating for affordable and equitable health care, partnering with strategic alliances to provide industry-leading products and services, and proudly serving more than 18 million unionized workers, retirees, and their families. Working hard for America's working families, for the health of America. Learn more by following them at Blue Labor on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter. And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. Let's go to line number 2 and welcome Stephen Beda. Stephen is an associate professor of history at the University of Oregon, where he researches and teaches labor history and environmental history. He is author of Strong Winds and Widowmakers, Workers, Nature, and Environmental Conflict in the Pacific Northwest Timber Country, which came out a couple of years ago at the University of Illinois Press. Stephen, welcome to America's Workforce. Thanks for joining us on the segment we call Labor 131 as we celebrate the 131st anniversary of Labor Day. So talk to me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into this spotted owl conflict. We're talking the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s, but a little bit about yourself first. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you. So yeah, like you said in that wonderful introduction, I am Associate Professor of History here at University of Oregon. You covered the important points, what I teach and what I research. And about me, I'm originally from Chicago, so the Chicago area, so not very close to Oregon, but this is my new adopted home. And I think the other pertinent thing about me is that, when I'm not in the archives doing research or in my office writing or in the classroom teaching, I am generally hunting or fishing here in Oregon. And that is actually a big part of how I came to write this book and follow this course of research.
I'm sure that's very inspiring for you. Yeah, one of my nephews moved over there not too long ago and just absolutely loves the area. Loves it so much.
Oh, it is beautiful. Well, and my joke is, so I'm a labor historian and an environmental historian, and one of the big ideas behind environmental history is that we environmental historians look at the landscape as our archive, right? So just as a kind of any other historian might go and look at records and look at papers of decisions that past peoples have made, we environmental historians look at nature as evidence of decisions that past peoples have made. So one of my jokes is, I can go hunting or fishing and pass it off as research because I'm out there in nature trying to explore these issues. So, I'll have colleagues ask you, what'd you do this week? And I'm like, both days I was hard at work doing research when I was out there hunting or fishing.
Well, when I was in rock radio, I was doing a lot of research, listening to music. Let me put it bluntly. So
there you go. Right.
I get it. I understand it. So let's talk about what happened. This is interesting because we recently had another guest on behalf of Labor 131 talking about the timber industry, primarily in the South.
Okay.
And what was happening there, and how they pretty much crushed those who try to organize. Now, this is the spotted owl conflict in not too long ago, mid-1980s and 1990s. What happened then?
Oh, well, it's a complex story, and I could talk about it for as long as people are willing to listen. But the kind of short version, and suffice it to say, there's a lot more nuance in here, but the short version is that beginning in the kind of early to mid 1980s, a lot of environmental groups that tended to represent environmentalists from kind of more middle-class urban areas really became concerned about the rate of harvests that were taking place in Pacific Northwest forests. And what they did in order to try and force the federal government and the United States Forest Service to reduce harvests was focus their activism on protecting what was at the time ostensibly an endangered species, the northern spotted owl. Now, whether it was endangered or not is a complicated question. And these environmentalists were very successful in pushing the Federal Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and ultimately the federal government to significantly reduce logging on national forests with the ostensible purpose of protecting this endangered species, the northern spotted owl. However, this had a massive financial, economic, and cultural impact on rural timber working communities all throughout Western Oregon and Western Washington. These were communities where pretty much every, working age male either worked in the woods or worked in the mill. These were communities that were entirely dependent on timber. And so when the Forest Service started implementing harvest restrictions at the behest of environmentalists, it completely I don't want to say decimated these communities, but hit them really hard. Unemployment rates skyrocketed to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Many of these communities, their very identity was rooted in logging. And so when they started to lose that, they kind of started to lose who they were. And this, I think, is a really important story for understanding contemporary Oregon and Washington. We have a deep urban-rural divide here. Where it doesn't matter what the policy is, doesn't matter what the politics are, rural communities are almost certain to disagree with urban communities. And I think understanding that urban-rural divide there's a lot of origins for it, but the spotted owl conflict is one of the big origins. So if you want to understand politics in the Northwest today, you got to understand this divide. And I think it also helps us understand the urban-rural divide, the kind of red state, blue states, red area, blue area divide we see across the nation today. Not that spotted owls or the northern spotted owl exists outside of Oregon, but a lot of the same issues about how we prioritize nature versus prioritizing work. To what extent do we privilege rural resource extraction work? These are issues that are pertinent to all of America. And so by looking at the spotted owl conflict, I think we can understand how the origin of some of these issues as they play out in other areas and other contexts.
So what you're essentially saying, what happened at that time in Oregon with the spotted owl is very reminiscent of what's happening in America today, because to your point, we have we're on the border of a civil war, in my opinion, when it comes to
indeed,
when it comes to the inner city versus the rural areas. I mean, it's two dynamics there, and there's a lot of conflict. It's like, you have to wonder, are we at the boiling point right now? But by studying what you did and who are still studying today, is it helping you navigate through this whole thing? Maybe there's a lesson to be learned here that we can share with our brothers and sisters in those states, saying, you know what, we better get along. Things aren't going well. We got to find some common ground. Is that where we're going?
Yeah. Well, and that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, because I, like many historians, are really concerned with the present and the future, right? Is that we study the past in order to give us a better understanding of what's going on now, the problems we are encountering, and how to fix them. And so, I actually think there are a lot of important lessons to be drawn from the spotted owl conflict. So what I really uncovered in the course of my research is that a lot of the stories that environmentalists from cities like Portland and cities like Seattle believed about rural timber workers were completely wrong. And a lot of the stories that rural timber workers in small logging communities believed about the environmentalists in Portland and Seattle were fictions and wrong. Is that both sides really developed caricatures of one another. And I think the big one was, a lot of and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but a lot of environmentalists believed that rural timber workers didn't care about nature for nature's sake. Environmentalists tended to believe that loggers viewed forests as simply economic opportunity. And what I show in my research and what I spend a lot of time talking about in my research is that that couldn't be further from the truth, is that a lot of loggers hunt, a lot of loggers fish. When they are not in the woods working, they are in the woods hiking or camping or backpacking or enjoying the outdoors the way that a lot of the environmentalists from urban areas enjoy the outdoors. And timber workers do not now, nor have they ever viewed the forest as purely an economic space. Yes, they view forest a little bit differently than maybe those urban environmentalists, because in addition to seeing it as a recreational space, they also see it as an economic space that is the source of their jobs. But they don't want to clear cut the entire forest. They want healthy forests for their children and their children's children. They do not want to cut every last tree if it means they could have a job. And indeed, one of the things I show is that throughout the late 20th century, even up to the present, timber working communities have often chosen preservation over harvests if they felt those harvests would be damaging to the long-term health of the forest. So what I think the big lesson of the spotted owl conflict is, among others, is that when we talk about this urban-rural divide, when we talk about the differences between rural communities and urban communities, red areas and blue areas, yes, are there differences? To be certain. Are there conflicts that need to be sorted out? Absolutely. But at least when it comes to the environment and how to manage the environment, there are more similarities than there are differences. Again, I want to be very clear that there are differences in how an environmentalist from Portland might see nature and want to manage nature versus a logger from a rural logging community. That being said, I think both groups can agree they want to protect the long-term health of the forest. Both groups can agree that there is value in trees beyond timber. And both groups can agree that there is a value in protecting species and wildlife habitat. So that's I think the big takeaway is that a lot of these differences that we imagine are just that, imagine.
Yeah.
They are the products of popular culture or the way the media has covered the story. They're not necessarily products of the culture of these places.
Yeah, I think part of that is by design too, so politicians can divide and conquer, put one side against the other. You know where I'm going with this. I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the takeaway, though, Professor, is balance. And I think our forefathers, and I've had many conversations with people like yourself, labor historians, who have tried to get in the mind of our forefathers, the people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, and this country called America, and what they wanted to conceive was a melting pot of nationalities. And when you have that melting pot, I think they're supposed to get along to the best that they can, and that's where the balance comes in. And I think what you just pointed out in Oregon is a snippet of that.
I was going to say, balance is the perfect word to use. And in my research, I often describe the way timber workers want to manage the forest as balanced forest management or multi-use forest management. I'd encourage everyone to stop for a second, look around them, and think about how much lumber is surrounding you right now. Right? If you're in a house, behind the drywall or the plaster is lumber. If you're sitting on furniture or at a desk, there's lumber involved. Lumber is really an important part of our modern economy. It's this incredibly old natural resource that has been used for millennia, and we still use it for buildings and houses and paper and all sorts of things. We need timber. We also really need wildlife habitat. We need forests to protect waterways. We need forests to help mitigate climate change. And so I think the key is finding a balanced forest management where we harvest some timber in order to meet our economic needs and we preserve some timber. And what I show in the course of my research is that timber workers have always thought about these balances because the way they use and experience the forest. And that sometimes, not all, but sometimes environmentalists have made the error of not thinking about the importance of lumber in our modern economy and our modern lives. So balance to me is the important word. Absolutely.
The interesting part about this conversation, Professor, is a spotted owl caused us to talk about it.
Yeah, well, and that's what's so funny is that really before the mid 1980s, no one had really heard of the spotted owl. Like, yeah, maybe you had a few, ornithologists, wildlife biologists who had studied it, but it's actually, the first wildlife biologists start studying it in the 70s, but it doesn't become an issue until the 80s. But by the late 1980s, early 1990s, the spotted owl is something of a celebrity. It's appearing in headlines in the New York Times. It's on the cover of Time magazine. Even like as far away as France and Germany, little kids are writing letters to the Forest Service saying, "Save the spotted owl." So yeah, it is somewhat interesting that this owl that no one knew about and really no one cared about until the 1980s is what sets off a huge economic and political upheaval in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, nature has a way of setting off an alarm, and that was definitely an alarm, no doubt about that.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Our featured guest on behalf of Labor 131 today, Stephen Beda, who is an associate professor at the University of Oregon Department of History. I'm going to let you go back to hunting and fishing in the meantime. You take care, stay safe, and stay in touch with us, okay?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
That'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, the National Labor Office of Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and another edition of Labor 131, How Science Has Transformed Work in America. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.